Even I myself forget this is an animation channel, not an anime channel.
That is super weird for a Viltrumite. They don't just give up.
What will you have after 500 years?
Oh, God. I still have years.
I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, and I'm the only one of us who can't fly.
I want to take a break from all that anime and talk about some good old great American animation for a little bit. And I don't think it was a better option than to talk about Invincible. And I am sort of late to the party-ish, not really. Like, comment, subscribe, it helps. Well, I didn't really watch the cartoon when it first aired the first season. I did when I was a kid. I went to the library with my dad, and I randomly picked up this book that was called Invincible. And I sort of read it, and I remember the art looking beautiful, as well as sort of the ending of that book of the omnibus that I had read, where like we get the huge Omni-Man reveal. And I say all this to say, I don't remember shit from that book other than that, I'm gonna be honest. But I came back in our Lord and Savior of the year 2024 just to watch this Amazon exclusive? Yeah, I think it's Amazon exclusive. But I sort of wanted to cut this video up in two parts, right? The first part, I'm going to be talking about season 1, and then the second half of the video, I'm going to be talking about season 2. So if you want to just cut and go straight to season 2 and see my thoughts there, you can go there. Or you want to see my full thoughts, and I guess here we go.
8 hours later.
But if anything, let me quickly get into the story. Put the 30-second timer up there now. But the story first starts off with a boy named Mark, right? He has no superpowers, but his father is Omni-Man, the guy that's basically the most powerful guy on the planet at this point in time. It reminds me of a guy that's in red and blue. But anyways, Omni-Man and the group he's affiliated with, the Harlem Globetrotters, I mean the Guardians of the Globe, go on like a Villain of the Week adventure, right? Where if it's like Justice League Unlimited to a certain point in degree. As that adventure is happening, Mark actually awakens his powers at the age of 17. Omni-Man comes back home, as well as Mark tells him, oh my goodness, I have superpowers. And Omni-Man is happy for a second, but then he has a sinister look by the end of things. We then hard cut to Omni-Man killing all of the Guardians of the Globe members, as well as waiting for backup to come help him. See, 30 seconds, that was the easiest 30 seconds ever, for sure. But let me get to my thoughts about season 1, right? After all that, after me seeing all of this, I thought Invincible was dog shit. It wasn't really that good. Imagine I actually meant that. No. It was fucking amazing. It was very, very good. But the first thing I have to talk about is just a coming of age story, right? And this comes from Mark's whole perspective of the suffering, the gratitude, the greatness, the balancing act that most heroes go through, especially if they're in school, which is balancing out their work life, their home life, as well as their relationships with not only their family, but their relationships with other people, their partners, as well as the lessons that have to be learned. Just like, for example, where he learns the lesson of learning about the little guys, the little people that are out there, sort of almost akin to the street level superheroes you have in Marvel, whether it be Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Spider-Man, Daredevil. Getting a complete understanding of everybody matters, not just everything at the top, but everything in the bottom, everything as a whole. Because when you fly high for way too long, you can always forget that there's a bottom. One thing I can also say I really do enjoy is like he's getting roughed around, right? He's getting taken out of the pan and into the fire in a world that necessarily doesn't start with the superheroes. He's already been in a world that has had superheroes for such a long time. So when he gets into all these experienced people where he has zero experience, it's almost obvious that he's going to get roughed around and fucked up every 2 seconds. But me also feeling extremely sad for Mark, right? Because not only was at the end of the season he was crushed emotionally as well as mentally, everything around him was just crushed to pieces by his father when he leaves on the worst note possible. Not only leaving his son broken, but his wife broken, as well as the whole planet broken about the actions that he's committed. In turn, leaving a 17-year-old boy to pick up the pieces where he left off, where he himself is still trying to figure out what he's going to be doing. Showing that he has a complete rough start, but once he gets to a certain point, he's going to be what legends are made out of. The last thing with Mark I want to talk about is just his relationship with him and Amber, because it specifically reminds you of something. Well, technically speaking, the end of something. But before I get to that, let me at least say for their relationship, right, it's completely understandable how things went about and how it played out, where they inherently break up because she can't necessarily take anymore. She can't take necessarily the lies or the lateness, or what I would assume that's going through her mind is lack of affection and care when it comes to all of that combined together. And even when Mark does say like, hey, I'm invincible, and sort of tells the reason why I am what I am and I'm just so late and all these other things, she's like, I don't necessarily care. You still lied to me and did all this other things. Like, I don't want to be around you. I don't feel like trusted me enough to tell me the truth, even though obviously he's not gonna do that, especially to someone he hasn't known for that long, making it feel like there's an argument on both sides. But what necessarily this reminded me of what I was hinting at is the situation with Spider-Man, where Spider-Man is dating this girl called Carly Cooper, right? And in this story time of big time Spider-Man, by the end of things, he sort of outs his identity to basically say all the excuses of necessarily why he was always late or why he didn't attend any events. And then the end of things, she's like, I really don't care. You didn't necessarily have enough trust in me to be like, okay, this is why I'm late, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, and they break up anyway. But in this case with Invincible, he necessarily gets back together with her, especially after all the events happen with Omni-Man, as well as him getting beat down and almost beat to death by his own father. But going back to the situation with him and Amber, it feels like it's a norm, right, where necessarily you get back together after a certain event happens. Let's just say, for example, someone in your family might have gotten hurt, maybe have died, or necessarily you get like ran over for a bus as an example. It happens a lot of times than you think, when necessarily someone gets back together with that person just because they feared for their life or feared for their safety or how they may feel in that specific moment. The only thing I did not like when it came to that is just how fast Amber necessarily started going back out with him and just kissed him when the door opened. That just felt weird and awkward. Like, it felt way too fast. With me saying this is if he needed this now or not, right? And also at the same time, at least bare minimum, he has everyone around him to support him in this time of need. But me moving on to Omni-Man, honestly, Omni-Man is probably my favorite thing of this whole season on a multitude of levels. What the first thing I want to talk about is just the mystery aspect of everything, right? Of why Omni-Man specifically did it, as well as everyone slowly but surely figuring out Omni-Man necessarily did everything. He's the whole reason why everything went bad. If anything, I akin this to Alfred Hitchcock and his theory on bombs, right? For example, we see a bomb that's under the table. We, the viewer, understand and know it's a bomb under the table, but all the people that's playing or in the act or you're seeing on the screen don't know it's a bomb under the table. So you're basically waiting for a multitude of things. One, you're waiting for a reaction to see how everyone's going to react to the bomb. Two, when they figure it out, if the bomb is there. And three, if they can even get outside of the building that's about to explode in 10 seconds. Also, just how disgusting necessarily he was playing everyone like a fiddle, and how many excuses or how many times he's like, oh, just trust me, we've known each other for at least 20 years. Feeling like a man that's been saving up all his cards just so he can wait for the exact moment to make the full house play. Then there's also a quote that I've said multitude of times, so many times at this point: the eyes are the windows to the soul. Now this fits extremely well with Omni-Man, right? Because necessarily with Omni-Man, he's a man that is confused.
You're confused, brother. Hey, brother, you're confused. I'm telling you, brother. You can't be
because he's a man that's been on this planet for at least 20 years. And that might be a spectacle or a dustpan to him per se, but he's been on there for 20 years and it's been extremely meaningful to him. So much so to the point where he doesn't necessarily know what's right and wrong, whether it be the Viltrumite way of doing things or necessarily the Earth way of doing things, be more kinder, be more nicer. With every single time you see him and he's gonna do something that will be akin to a Viltrumite, what you should be doing, he always regresses, he always comes back, he always looks to the left and right of him, he always thinks in his head like, what the fuck am I doing? With all of that adding up and being too much for him, so he leaves the planet because he can't necessarily deal and cope with it anymore, knowing deep down inside he is potentially extremely wrong. Now the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to season 1 is the world itself. I love how necessarily we get put into a world that already has had superheroes, that is already in motion and is going to continue to be in motion whether we see Mark or not. With us already having a solidified world and Mark sort of interacting with it, it sort of is a ripple effect where things are getting more and more dangerous and more events are necessarily going to be happening in the future. But each episode feeling like things happen, right, and we're progressing, but it's not over yet. There's a part 2 that necessarily we're going to have to deal with in the future. We're still having problems and issues that aren't being resolved, and it's just something that we can't see yet, whether it be Omni-Man, Battle Beast, or even Titan taking over the Syndicate. It seems like I hope he does a better job instead of just being like a fucking kingpin, but it is what it is. Now on to season 2.
8 hours later.
Again!
I don't get to be sad. I'm part of the problem. Now, why would you lie to me again?
Oh my goodness, was that crazy? Wow, there's a lot to unpack here. I guess the first few things I probably would want to talk about, I guess, is like Mark is like a literal identity crisis from last season, or not only just for him but like also for Omni-Man. It feels like they both have an identity crisis and then necessarily trying to figure out what the hell they're gonna do. Well, Mark is just like, he feels like he's in his father's shadow and he thinks he's gonna eventually be like him, even though everyone in his life is telling him that's not gonna happen, as well as his own actions of helping the little people in season 1, as well as in season 2, him not wanting to necessarily kill the Viltrumites off the rip. But that all goes into a panic and all down the drain when necessarily he kills Langstrom because he necessarily thought he was stronger. And I think maybe subconsciously he did also want to kill him at the same time for the actions he did, which is extremely fair, but it doesn't also at the same time make you Omni-Man. By having all this to basically show you that necessarily even if everyone is telling you, or all your actions are being done that's a good thing or the opposite of what you want, the brain could be a very scary place. It could drown you in thoughts that you don't really want. And the only way that things can go into Mark's favor is if he thinks and he believes in his mind 100% that it's going to go this specific way, with the added bonus on wanting to control his powers more if he wants to continue being a superhero that doesn't necessarily kill. Then there's Omni-Man's midlife crisis, where necessarily is nature versus nurture, his traditions of how he was raised versus his nurture when he was on Earth, when he was on the new planet, having extremely late realizations in his life about what he wants and values as important to him, whether it be the value of life, his actual family, his wife, his kids. And then finally, as the last second on the episode, he gets the realization of also having something to fight for other than himself and the Empire. Then also going back from season 1 to Amber as well as Mark's relationship, right? I thought it made sense from start to finish of how things sort of coalesce happened, except for that one moment, like I said, at the end of season 1. And even in season 2, it all necessarily makes sense. She feels selfish because she necessarily has these feelings of being wanted, which is extremely natural, but at the same time, Mark has the responsibility of upholding the world, especially when Omni-Man's gone. A role on this planet that necessarily nobody could fill. And when they're around each other, they necessarily feel bad for each other. For one, Amber felt like she's like taking away his time from saving the Earth, as well as him feeling like, hey, I'm actually like not being around you. I'm not being a good necessarily boyfriend to you. With the added bonus in my last reference to Spider-Man, I promise, not everyone can necessarily be a Mary Jane and can necessarily be like, it's fine, he'll come back another time. Sometimes people are like a Carly Cooper. It doesn't necessarily work out perfectly for everybody, but sometimes it's just best to go your separate ways and move on. Then there's also 2 other characters I didn't necessarily talk about, but I'm going to talk about now ever since season 1, and we'll just walk our way down. One, I really want to talk about Eve, right? Eve, I just necessarily felt extremely bad for. It's like she is in a position where she's in a toxic environment, and just an environment that doesn't want to see her prosper, wants to see her in an undermined environment, whereas mostly her father and a little bit of her mother, but her father is just undermining every single achievement that she necessarily has done. And even when she does mess up, he rubs it in her face instead of confronting her and as well as helping her, having a realization that it's okay, people make mistakes. The only person that necessarily does that and is like that shining leap of hope out of all this despair this season is actually Rex. Rex actually comes around and gives her advice as well as help of like, yo, people make mistakes, it happens, we are all heroes. And it gets almost really tragic because he almost falls into that pit of despair and almost conformity when it comes to her father, as well as her mother, technically speaking, enabling but not really saying anything, but sort of basically silently agreeing or just not saying anything at all. And at this point, you just sometimes have to have a realization to yourself that you have to cut things off in your life. You have to move on and move forward with whatever you're doing, even if you're by yourself, which she did the first time, but she has to do it again. But the great thing and added bonus is she's not by herself. She has Rex, she has Invincible, she has the rest of people on the globe. And a person that is extremely obvious that I felt extremely bad for this whole time, the person that was fighting the mystery the whole time, Mark's mom, Debbie. What really feels like this season is like mostly a despair arc, and how everyone tends to deal with it, like how Mark deals with it is like he's attempting to figure out everything by cutting off everything and figuring out his powers and his control, right? And we're sort of in a mystery biome of what he's going to do. With Eve, she finds out Rex, and Rex necessarily helps her to uplift her and become a better person. With Debbie, she just goes through a multitude of things from all the things that's happened to her, whether it be her husband leaving her for after 20 years, calling her a pet and basically being extremely dismissal to her, for her feeling at fault for all the murders per se, even though it's nowhere close to her fault whatsoever, and her just non-stop of breaking down because she necessarily is holding in all these feelings and she doesn't have an outlet to like really let it go and be released, which led to a multitude of things, whether it be her drinking to the end of a bottle every night with wine, or her almost attempting to end her own life, or her going to her quote-unquote husband's grave, as well as her grieving and just like sort of screaming and shouting at it. She goes through a way too real human experience that a lot of people in life necessarily go through when it comes to grief, and almost down a path that not many people can say like they have came back from. But I believe this quote best personifies it.
Granddad, what do you do when you can't do nothing, but there's nothing you can do?
You do what you can.
Now this quote, technically speaking, goes to everybody this season, but I'll just mostly go to Debbie, right? With Debbie, she does what she can. She moves forward. She does what a lot of people do in life. You have to keep going, because if you stop and you just continue to look back at that hideous monster that's behind you, you're gonna get consumed by it. She tries to distract herself. She tries to think about Mark. She tries to work with Mark. She tries to work with Oliver. She tries to go to work itself. And even in the end, she looks like she wants to move on from Nolan and go on dates with other people. Again, something that not a lot of people can necessarily do. Move on. And with that, yeah, that's actually most everything I had to say about Invincible. I had a really good time with it, and even some of the comedy parts were actually hilarious.
What the fuck?
Hi, sorry. It's okay. I'm in.
Go fuck yourself, Darkblood.
We good. Huh? Never better? You know me. I'm practically.
Really finally got a chance to watch Invincible and as well as talk to you all about it, my thoughts and my weird opinions I have on it. If you guys have anything to say in the comments to me, or whether it be positive, negative, we just have a conversation about things, as well as telling me anything I have missed or I just didn't want to necessarily talk about, let's be real. But other than that, thank you guys for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye!